Welcome to This Explainer. When we think of the British monarchy, we usually picture this incredibly rigid, deeply traditional institution, right? Like something completely separate from our everyday lives. But honestly, when you really look at the data and the history, a much more complex picture emerges. So we're going to break down the incredible paradoxes of Queen Elizabeth II's life. We're talking everything from near-mythical legal superpowers to her very real and honestly sometimes startling human vulnerabilities. Let's get right into it.
Okay, let's start things off with a rather wild question. It's one of those bits of trivia you always hear thrown around at dinner parties. Did the Queen actually own all the swans? I mean, it sounds like a complete fairy tale, right? Like something straight out of a medieval legend rather than a modern legal code. But looking at the historical records, her connection to the wildlife of the UK is actually way stranger and way bigger than just a few swans swimming around in the Thames.
Get this? Her absolute authority actually extended right out into the open ocean, by law. And we're talking about a statute dating all the way back to 1324 during the reign of King Edward II. The monarch officially owned all unmarked mute swans in open water. But it doesn't stop there. She also owned all the fishes royal. That literally includes dolphins, whales, and sturgeons in British waters. So whenever one of these creatures washed ashore, it was technically claimed on behalf of the crown. It's wild, right? It establishes this almost mythical status right from the start, portraying a figure whose dominion literally covered the creatures of the sea.
Section 1. Royal Rules and Superpowers.
0. That is the exact number of passports she needed to travel the globe. Now, during her incredible reign, she visited over 100 different countries. She went on countless state visits, shaking hands with presidents, prime ministers, emperors, you name it, yet she never once held a passport. Why? Well, it's because all British passports were officially issued in her name. So the logic was pretty simple. She didn't really need to issue a document to herself to prove who she was. She was, quite literally, the living embodiment of the state.
And here's another 0. This is the exact number of driving licenses she required to get behind the wheel. Just like the passports, driving licenses in the UK are issued in the monarch's name. So she never had to take a driving test, she never carried a license, and get this, she didn't even need license plates on her personal vehicles. Imagine that for a second, driving right past a police officer with absolutely no license plates, knowing for sure you are completely immune from being pulled over.
But here's the really crucial point. Even though she had these literal legal superpowers, she wasn't just sitting idly in the passenger seat. During World War II, back before she was queen, she actually joined the Auxiliary Territorial Service. And she didn't just casually drive, she trained as a full-on mechanic and drove these heavy military ambulances. She knew how to change a tire, she knew how to rebuild an engine. It's such a fascinating paradox. The woman rolling up her sleeves and getting covered in engine grease was the exact same woman who, legally, wouldn't require a driver's license for the rest of her life.
Section 2. 2 birthdays every year.
So her actual birth happened on April 21st. That was the day she was privately born, and the day she'd celebrate with her close family. But the entire nation, and really the whole Commonwealth, celebrated her official, highly public birthday in June. Yep, 2 birthdays. I know, it sounds like literally every kid's ultimate dream, right? But it was actually a highly calculated institutional decision. The reason for this double celebration? It was incredibly practical. It honestly just came down to British weather. If you've ever been to London in April, you know it can be incredibly rainy and freezing cold. Obviously, that's not exactly ideal for a massive, spectacular outdoor parade. So the official celebration, specifically the famous Trooping the Color Parade with its hundreds of soldiers, horses, and musicians, was bumped to June, when the odds of actually seeing some sunshine were way higher. The Crown essentially just bent the calendar to make sure the public spectacle was visually perfect.
Section 3. A historic royal wedding.
Right in the aftermath of a totally devastating global conflict, her monumental 1947 wedding to Prince Philip captured the entire globe's attention. Philip, fun fact, was actually her distant cousin through Queen Victoria, which was a super common occurrence in European royal lineages. But this event also showed a surprisingly relatable vulnerability. In 1947, the UK was still heavily recovering from the massive economic toll of World War II. Rationing was still very much in effect for everyday citizens. And the future queen, she wasn't entirely exempt from that economic reality. She actually had to use her own World War II ration coupons to buy the tulle, chiffon, and silk needed to make her iconic wedding dress. Now, the government did end up granting her an extra 200 coupons, but just the fact that the future monarch was dealing in ration books really grounds her in the shared struggle of the people at that time.
But man, once that dress was made, the sheer scale of the event was absolutely staggering. Keep in mind, we're talking about 1947 here, way before the internet, long before global satellite streaming. Yet, the wedding pulled in a global audience of roughly 200 million radio listeners. 200 million! She received 10,000 telegrams of well wishes from all over the world. And she even got a piece of lace woven from yarn spun by Mahatma Gandhi himself. It was a deeply symbolic gesture from a huge global figure, kind of bridging that massive gap between empire and independence. A wedding of immense geopolitical significance, all kickstarted with ration coupons.
Section 4. Security Scares and Taxes.
Now let's take a look at a series of dramatic events that completely pierced that royal bubble. In 1981, a teenager named Marcus Sargent fired 6 blank shots directly at the Queen while she was riding her horse down the mall. Just a terrifying moment that really highlighted her physical vulnerability. Then, just a year later, in 1982, we have the infamous Michael Fagan incident. And finally, jumping forward a decade to 1992, we see a massive shift in her financial relationship with the state. Let's break these down a bit more.
That 1982 incident, it is just unbelievable. Imagine being the most famous woman in the world, sleeping in one of the most heavily guarded palaces on Earth. Yet, an intruder named Michael Fagan actually managed to scale the walls of Buckingham Palace, completely bypass all internal security, and wander right into the Queen's private bedroom while she was fast asleep. And what happened next? They reportedly had a conversation, literally. For several minutes, the seemingly untouchable monarch sat on her bed, calmly talking to a total stranger who had just broken into her room until security finally showed up. Talk about shattering the illusion of absolute impenetrable safety.
And then there's the whole financial side of her reality. She had an estimated net worth hovering right around 450 to 500 million American dollars. So undeniably incredibly wealthy, with these vast private estates and assets. And for the vast majority of her reign, her personal income from those estates was completely tax-free. It was basically another one of those legal superpowers we were talking about earlier.
But things eventually changed. The year 1992 was notoriously rough for the royal family. The Queen herself even called it her Annus Horribilis, a terrible year filled with scandals and that devastating fire at Windsor Castle. So amidst this growing public debate about how much the monarchy was actually costing, she made a really pragmatic decision. Despite having absolutely no legal obligation to do so under British law, she chose to voluntarily step down from that financial pedestal. Starting in 1992, she actually began paying income tax and capital gains tax on her personal wealth, exactly like a regular citizen. It was a profound, very real acknowledgement of the modern world encroaching on ancient privilege.
So, we've traced the life of a woman who legally owned the creatures of the sea and traveled the globe without a passport, yet paid for her wedding dress with ration coupons and woke up to a total stranger in her bedroom. She lived a life defined by ancient, almost magical laws, but ultimately subjected herself to modern income tax. I want to leave you with this. Between those mythical legal superpowers and her very stark, deeply human vulnerabilities, how much of Queen Elizabeth's life was truly her own and how much was simply the heavy machinery of the crown? Keep questioning the history you think you know, and we'll see you in the next explainer.